Good morning, everyone. My name is Mary Deller. I'm faculty lecturer marketing at McGill University, and it is my pleasure to introduce Dean Way this morning. So grab that second cup of coffee because you're in for a treat. He is a speechwriter, webinar ghostwriter, and he writes speeches, webinars, presentations for live audiences, like many of you who are joining us live on Facebook this morning and in the house with us today. He writes anywhere that you need someone to listen to you and perform an action. So an action once we're done. That's what it's all about, right? It's writing and then getting that call to action. So if you think about something and you say, you know what, something really resonated with me with what I heard yesterday, it's very possible that Dean has written that piece for you. So a lot of us will probably feel that sometimes no one's listening. Well, Dean's going to help us to some tips, some nuggets on how to grab attention, and most importantly, how to be remembered. It's going to challenge you this morning to think about what you know, what you think you know, and why do you remember something that someone said. And he's going to tell us how he does it and how we reverse our approach to audiences. We turn it over to Dean for the precious half hour we have with him this morning. Thank you.
All right, let's see if this works. Okay, I hope you can hear me. Looking good? Great. Hi, hi, I'm Dean. I'm a live audience copywriter and speechwriter, which means that I write stuff that other people say to their audiences. And with any live audience, making sure that you're remembered is just about the most critical thing you can aim for. I'd even say it's more important than the content itself. And I'm usually the guy that writes the content as well, because no matter how hard you work on your content or what you want to say about yourself or what you want people to know or what you want people to do, if they don't pay attention to it while you're saying it, or they do pay attention, but they immediately forget it, so they don't remember anything about it the next day, then why did you do all that work to present to them? In this session, I'm going to give you some techniques and really ways of thinking about audience attention and what audiences pay attention to and what they'll remember that I use when I write for my clients. Where I always like to start with them is with these clients, as we talk about who their audience is and what it is they want to say to that audience, I like to start by having them watch a video that, well, there are lots of different versions of this video on YouTube. If you did a search for Stephen Covey rocks sand, you'd find a million of them. Here's how it works. Stephen Covey wrote a very popular book that a lot of people have heard of called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I even saw someone refer to it yesterday in one of these sessions. On stage, when he was giving his talk, he liked to use a visual prop. What he does in the video is he has these 2 very large jars. They're like mason jars on steroids. And he has a volunteer. What he does is, let's just skip to the end. He has rocks about the size of your fist, and the rocks are labeled things like family, spirituality, career, education, stuff like that. And then he has a bunch of sand. Sometimes it's green sand, sometimes it's regular sand. And the point, we'll skip to the end here. The point of the video, the point of the demonstration he does is that if you put all the sand in first, and the sand represents everything else in life, all the distractions and unimportant stuff in life. If you put that into the jar first, and then try to fit all the rocks in, it's possible, but it's not easy. It's way more work than it should be. But if you put the rocks in first as your priorities and your focus, then the sand, all the other stuff in life, you can just pour it in and it will fill every available space, every crevice, nook and cranny around the rocks. Now, Stephen Covey wasn't a writer. Well, he was a writer, but he wasn't a speechwriter and he wasn't a copywriter. And he didn't have to worry about audience attention the way that my clients do, because they're not famous authors for the most part. So the lesson that Stephen Covey didn't give to the people he was talking to, the lesson that I start every client off with, is that we make the mistake when we look at our content and what we want to convey, and then we try to figure out the best way to say it, the most memorable way, or the way to get the most attention, right? What Stephen Covey didn't tell the audience, because he wasn't a copywriter and he wasn't a speechwriter, is that to everyone in the audience, your audience, his audience, every audience, you're not the rocks, you're the sand. You're one little grain of sand flowing around all the other important things in their life that are important to them. Your content And what you want to say, no matter how grand or important or critical, is still sand in their life. And so once you understand that you're the sand, not the rocks, you can figure out what it is you need to do, what you have to say, and how you have to say it, to attach yourself to their beliefs, their priorities, to be next to one of the audience's rocks. Because no matter how much money you want to spend as a company, no matter how much time you want to spend as an individual or a job seeker or a small business person trying to interrupt people and inspire them and intrigue them, the fact remains you're sand, and they have rocks that they actually care about. If you're going to be paid attention to, if you're going to be remembered, understand that you're the sand and connect to connect your message to a rock. It's the same in traffic, by the way. When you're stopped at a red light, every person in every car and in every building, plus every pedestrian, has a rich and complex life being lived at the exact moment yours is. And even though they're right next to you, you're not part of any of those complex stories, except as a grain of sand. And they're each just a grain of sand in your rich, complex story. So you either need to be very new and different from everything they're already familiar with, or you need to immediately connect yourself to one of their rocks, ideally both if you can manage it. Everyone else thinks they can interrupt their way through. Everyone else starts with what they want to say and figures out the best way to say it. You need to start with what your audience will pay attention to and will remember, and then write your message in that context. Connect what you want to say to what they want to hear, what they want to know more about, what they care about. That's how you get remembered. Now, I tell this to clients and they think, oh, that's too much work. Or they say, I don't know how to connect what I want to say to what audiences really care about. But as humans, this is actually one of the very best things we're good at. I mean, we're so good at this, we hack our own brains and see things that aren't connected at all. We're great at connecting any two things into some kind of pattern. That's why we see Jesus's face in a piece of burnt toast or UFOs in clouds. Humans are fantastic at connecting unconnected things to create something familiar. So you already know what your audience will pay attention to. You already know what they'll remember because they're the same as you. So let's remind ourselves, what do audiences remember? What do audiences pay attention to? In my world, business communications, I focus on 3. First up, audiences remember dissonance. We might express this as creating or highlighting a gap or as creating tension. We're so good at seeing patterns that when someone breaks a pattern, our brains pay attention and remember that. So here's an example of that. One of the things I teach people is how to open their presentations or talk. It's very critical to know how to open properly. And one of the techniques I like them to use is called the contra technique. Contra basically runs like this. X, whatever X is true, but not for us, not for people like you. Here's a really silly made up example of that. Milk is healthy for you. It's always been healthy, but not for people with green eyes, or not for people who live in this part of the world, not for you. That creates a gap between everyone else and you or the group or the company that you belong to. That's instant dissonance because it doesn't feel right to us for something to not fit. Days, even years later, while you're waiting for coffee or you're brushing your teeth or brushing your hair, that thought springs to mind, not even related to what you're doing. It springs to mind with the question, remember that time with that thing that just didn't fit? How milk isn't good for people with green eyes? Our brains can't let go of things that are misfits. They also can't let go of things that are near fits. That's why audiences remember near closure. Audiences love closure. Audiences love a question that's answered, a gap that's closed, a problem that's solved, which is great. We want to have a satisfied, happy audience, except you have to have at least one thing that gets nearly closed, where they get near closure and then stop. So that little gap never gets covered. It never gets filled. The chain never gets into the circle on the lock. Because while you want a satisfied audience, you don't want an audience that is, dissatisfied the entire time. So it can't be a bunch of all near closure. But to be remembered, there has to be a little bit of near closure. Now, this is related to dissonance, but not quite. Dissonance is when you put two things together or near each other, and the audience can't reconcile one with the other. Near closure is when the audience can almost taste or feel a satisfying conclusion coming up, and then you don't deliver on it deliberately. that gets remembered. If you can craft your message around the fact that the gap can't fully be closed, you've got something that will spring to an audience's mind long after you finish talking. It might manifest itself, by the way, as an emotion later in the audience's memory than a clear recollection of the fact or actual gap, but it's there and they won't forget it. They also definitely remember new supporting views on what they already believe. There's an entire disinformation industry on Facebook based on coming up with new supporting views for what people already believe. You also see this a lot in political speeches, especially in authoritarian regimes or deliberate disinformation campaigns. Most people think that providing new views on already held beliefs is a persuasion technique, and it sort of is. But it's not about persuading people so much as making sure that after the speech is over, long after it's over, people continue to deliberately recall it. They deliberately reach into their memory and pull it ahead so they can reinforce it in their own minds. It feels good. It makes them feel justified. It's also used, of course, in business. A lot of advertising is built around this technique. And if you think about it, job interviews can use this technique. If you like to have questions for the interviewer prepared ahead of time, so, where they ask you, do you have any questions for me? Or any questions about the company? This is the technique you use, right? New reasons or new views or new perspectives on why they should feel good about their company. Leaving an open gap wouldn't really work here. Dissonance wouldn't work very, very well here, but reinforcement of current beliefs with new views and new information is exactly what you want to leave a job interviewer with. As in, this person is exactly what we want in a way that I never even knew we wanted. Right? That's a great negotiating position for salary after the initial interview process. And one last one for today. People remember highly emotional conflict. I write for businesses and people in business, so I don't write highly emotional conflict very often. And so it's not really appropriate for what I do, but it might be for you. It's always memorable. We never forget a highly charged argument with our mother or spouse. We never forget someone else's road rage directed at us. Those kind of experiences burn into our memory and never get eroded away, not completely. Okay, so a quick recap before we get into some more detail. First, remember that you're the sand in other people's lives, not the rocks. Any time and effort you spend trying to interrupt or push people to pay attention to you and remember you are probably going to be wasted until you accept you're the sand. You're the unimportant part of their life. Instead, we want to accept how the human brain works and use techniques that align with that, like accepting someone's face in burnt toast. Next up, we dug into dissonance or tension or gaps. That was the milk isn't good for green-eyed people example. Then it was near closure, where we leave something almost resolved, not quite. And then I talked about supporting their current beliefs with new views, which is used heavily in politics and things like vaccination and great job interviews where you want to make serious money. And finally, everyone remembers highly charged emotional things, but those aren't used much in business. Now, I need to talk about the second right answer and masturbation. The second right answer. So almost all of us can come up with a good enough or right answer really quickly to most of the questions in life. You've probably even experienced where we can even instantly come up with our opinions on things we didn't even have an opinion on until someone asked us about it. When you're working on a problem or trying to convey something to an audience, something that you want them to understand and remember, you need to go for the second right answer. And the second right answer only comes through thinking over time, but it's always there. People who write a lot understand that, for example, the concept of the crappy first draft, that if they're going to write something good, they need to get the crappy first draft out of the way so they can finally get to the second right answer. Everyone's first draft is crappy. Professionals understand that the crappiness isn't a reflection on their writing ability or thinking ability. It's just the way writing works. So you get that crappy first draft out of the way as fast as possible, because it's a lot easier to edit something into being valuable than to create something valuable from scratch on a blank screen or a blank piece of paper. So for whatever you're trying to convey, that you are the right candidate for a job, or the customer or prospect should buy from you, or that your views are valid, the things that you remember other people saying are almost always related to a second right answer. They went beyond the instant pat answer that all of us can come up with in a few seconds or fraction of a second. They worked it through, right? They worked it out over time and they got to the second right answer, which is always more valuable or more interesting or more novel than the first right answer. You don't have to have a presentation or speech or job interview answers or whatever that's 100% full of second right answers. That would be great. If you can manage it, go for it. But you need to go past the first right answer and into the second right answer on whatever it is you want someone or an audience to remember days or weeks or years later. Everything that you remember that's at all intellectual or fact-based was at one time someone's second right answer. They went past the instant easy into the tougher, slower, and that's what you remembered after they said it. All right, so let's talk about masturbation. In all writing and in all communication, where one person, especially someone who isn't a professional writer, is trying to create a content piece or a message for an audience, masturbation is everywhere. And here's what masturbation is in this context. Masturbation is when you write something or say something that's for your pleasure, regardless of how the audience or reader will experience it. So it's always a partnership, you and the reader, you and the listener. It's a partnership. And when you're doing something just for you, something that makes you smile because it's so clever how I said that. And, oh, wow, I'm such a good writer. Look how smart I am. That's masturbation. You did that for you. You weren't thinking about whether you were maintaining their attention, whether you're being memorable, or whether they're getting everything out of the experience that they could. You did that for you, right? The most common place we find this masturbation is in cliches and overblown language. When we create our crappy first draft, cliches can be everywhere, right? It's you trying to feel smarter. You don't sound smarter because nobody thinks that a cliche sounds smart. We use them, or we use words that are more complex than they need to be because it makes us feel good as writers, as presenters, makes us feel good as fragile individuals, but we're not here to make ourselves feel smart. When we're writing or creating for other people, for an audience, we're writing for them. And so you need to ruthlessly go through what you write and what you prepare and remove anything that makes you smile or chuckle because you think, wow, yeah, that's good. I did an impressive job there. That's good writing. That's good language. It's not good writing. It's not good language. It's masturbation. Cut that out and replace it with something simple and declarative in the active voice. Nothing turns off an audience's attention faster than verbal or literary masturbation. And if they didn't pay attention to something, they aren't going to remember it afterwards. The last thing we need to cover in just a couple of minutes is the quest for distraction. This is the easiest to understand and hardest to master. You have to stand out in some way for an audience. And that doesn't mean you need to be exemplary or the best in the world or the only one of something in the world. It just means you need to stand out in a way that matters to the audience, to be different in a way that matters to them. You need to have that second right answer, right? Everyone's on a quest for distraction, for novelty. And that quest is your biggest ally in the struggle for audience attention and memory. A lot of people think it's the biggest enemy, but it's really your biggest ally. Everyone is always looking for the next thing to distract them. That, at least in the business world, it's not that hard to stand out so that people looking for a distraction will be interested. It's easy to come up with dissonance or near closure or new views on existing beliefs. It's easy to get to the second right answer. You just need to be bored. You need to bore your brain as it looks for its next distraction. Like take a walk without headphones, drive your car or commute without listening or watching or reading anything. Stop bringing your phone when you sit on the toilet. Give your brain a chance to process all the thoughts in there. It will work up the second right answer all on its own. It will come up with the memorable, novel, interesting things that you'll create. It just needs some time on its own without you shoving more distracting crap into it. It's so easy and it's super hard, right? I get that. We crave that dopamine hit, man. We crave learning new stuff and seeing what other people are doing and being entertained. Putting yourself into boredom is hard, super easy, but so hard. But I mean it. I make a very nice living helping people be remembered just by letting myself be bored a lot. In the 21st century, explaining that you need actual, truly boring time in your life is like explaining to someone how great skydiving is. Right? Most people will never jump out of a plane or understand why you would try to get them to jump out of a perfectly fine airplane. And just like skydiving, once you do it, you understand how great it is. And, friends, however you get there, that's okay, right? If being somewhere quiet does it for you, do that. Every so often when my father-in-law visits us, I'll walk into the TV room and he's just sitting there. No TV, might not even have the lights on. He spent his career as an aerospace engineer, and he likes to let his brain do its thing by sitting in an empty, quiet room. Right? If I walk in, I totally get it. I leave, TV can wait. If inward boredom like that doesn't do it for you, and it usually doesn't for me, outward boredom is great too. I like to be bored by sitting in on a training session and tuning out the speaker. Some people like to sit in coffee shops and tune out the background noise. I get a lot of thinking done by having that little bit of mental resistance to paying attention to something happening near me. Whatever gets you to boredom, inward boredom or outward boredom, do that. The best way is whatever the best way is for you, but be bored a lot more than you have been lately. And that's the real end of this talk. I mean, I started out with, let me give you one more slide. I started out with how we need to think of ourselves counterintuitively as the sand in other people's lives and not the rocks. And I'm ending here with a similar counterintuitive concept that we need to gift ourselves boredom, because that's how we figure out new ways that we can get the attention of and be remembered by the people who never put themselves into boredom and are always looking for ways to avoid boredom. So that's it for me. Any comments, thoughts, dreams, fantasies, argument? I will say that I'm doing a free workshop for people who want to make their best ever presentation. I've got like 6 slots left. I don't charge for this. And if you're interested, there's a link on the screen. I have, just don't worry about it if you're not interested, but it should be fun. All right, what were the questions?
Yeah, let's open up to questions. So we have a couple in the chat here. Can you just give that example? Again, Anita would like to know the almost closing of a gap. So something that really
Sure.
gets the
Okay.
idea.
So here's a couple of ways to do that. So actually, I think if you go to that page, I've got videos for folks that explain. The second video is all about audience attention, and it lays out a whole bunch of techniques that I use for clients. So almost everyone knows what a call forward or call back is, or what like a setup and payoff is if you're watching like a TV show or a movie. So it's where like they mention something that's going to happen, or they maybe foreshadow it a little bit, and then later it pays off. Do you think he's ever going to find love? And then he finds love. Audiences do not like open loops like that. Like they'll open a loop in their brain, or sometimes I'm very, very explicit about it. So I'm going to tell you about X in just a minute. First, I need to talk about this topic, and then we're going to get to it. And then when I get to it, I said I was going to talk about X. Now here's X. If I don't ever close and say, I said I was going to talk about X, and now I'm not going to, or I said we're going to talk about X, but it makes more sense to talk about this, then I've left an open loop. And audiences hate that, but they hate it in a good way. They hate it like, all right, well, what was the answer to that? What was he going to tell us? How was he going to finish that thought, right? What happened to that person? How is it exactly? What's the third reason that I'm not going to, that I would want to get involved with this company or hire this person or whatever? And so like you deliberately set up sort of a call forward. I'm going to talk about X, or we should do this. And then say, well, I guess we don't really have time for that, or it makes more sense to do X, or just not even mention it at all. And some portion of the audience will be like, well, what happened to that? Right? You hate it when a TV show doesn't close off something that they opened up. And so near closure is when you can explicitly say, I'm going to do X, or talk about X, or show you X, or there's a slide coming up about X, and then you actually never do it.
Thanks, Dean.
We do it a lot in sales, and in sales it's used to get the next meeting, because in sales you're always trying to get your company and their company closer together, and so you want the second in-depth meeting. You say, well, we'll just cover it in the second meeting, and then you've got your second meeting.
Thanks, Dean. There's a great comment by Cirque, who says, you can't imagine the inspiration I've encountered on my numerous short airplane trips. My favorite. I guess the opportunity to be bored. Erica would like to know if you can give a concrete example of a second right answer.
Almost everything I do is the second right answer. Basically, in your own life, if you think about, if I ask you, what's your best idea, or your boss says, like, we need some ideas on how to improve ABC, right? And almost immediately, all of us will come up with 1 or 2 or 3 possibilities for AB3, but they are generally uninspired. Right? You almost never have a breakthrough right away. But it's important, those initial ideas, just like the initial first draft of anything you're going to write for a presentation or speech or whatever, you need to get that out of the way anyway. So you need to have those uninspired, instant, light and easy pat answers. Just get them out of your brain. And then, but if you go back and keep thinking about the same question, then the second or even third right answer will come. And generally speaking, the second or and even third right answers have the benefit of knowing what the first answers were, but then they've had a chance to bake and mature in your brain, and other things sort of in your mind and in your life, and that you've read in a book you read 4 years ago, you know, or a podcast you heard 6 years ago, something stuck in there, and then that gets attached, and they sort of, those things combine into a second or even third right answer, where it's clearly a better option. Like, wow, that's a great idea. We should do that. So you just get the initial first answers out of your system as fast as possible, just like you write a first draft as quickly as possible, and then give yourself some time and then come back and think about it again. You'll almost always come up with a second right answer.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dean. This has been fantastic. There's a couple of things that I just wanted to highlight, that there were so many nuggets in here, and I wish we had more time with you, but that whole idea of that so many points you can expand, a very critical opening, you know, X is true, but not for you. You're looking at that framework, and how that's the lens. I guess that critical opening is the lens by which we evaluate everything afterwards. Thought that was just so interesting, and making sure that you remembered for sure that people here in this room, the 50 or so folks who joined us today, are going to remember you, Dean. And I have to tell you that when you're lost for words, I think Dean can put words in our mouth anytime, but he has a lot to say. Dean, is there a way that folks can, some people who there wasn't connectivity, phone connectivity issues folks were having in terms of putting the chat, is there any way that people can connect with you? How do they find out how to reach out to you, Dean, and get more Dean time, or question here or there? How do we reach out to you, Dean?
I think the easiest way is to go to, actually, for people who can't see it, that wouldn't make any sense because it's too hard. LinkedIn is definitely the easiest way to get through to me. WAYE. I think I might be the only Dean Way on LinkedIn. So look for, Dean, WAYE. And if you're not sure, scroll on down to the bottom. If that dude went to university in Newfoundland, Canada, that's your guy.
That's a little bit of that's a very really good point on that. Dean, you've got lots of accolades that are happening in the chat. Thank you to everyone for joining us this morning. I think Valerie will close us off.